What if you were told that Jim Caviezel's transformation to play Jesus Christ was not just an actor's preparation, but something that completely changed who he was as a person, something that Hollywood tried to hide for almost 2 decades? What happened to Caviezel during and after playing the most sacred role in cinema history went far beyond any known acting method. It was a transformation so profound, so disturbing and so real that to this day many wonder if that was really just cinema or if something supernatural took over that film set. And the most intriguing thing of all is that the consequences of this transformation haunt the actor to this day, in ways he could never have imagined when he accepted the role. Few know that Jim Caviezel almost refused the role of Jesus Christ. When Mel Gibson first approached him in 2002, Caviezel was on the rise in Hollywood. He had just starred alongside Jennifer Lopez in Angel Eyes and had received critical acclaim for his work in The Thin Red Line. Studios were beginning to see him as a reliable leading man, a clean and versatile face that could easily star in major productions. His career was on the right track, and accepting such a controversial role could destroy everything he had built. But when Gibson described his vision for the Passion of the Christ, something changed inside Caviezel. It was not a rational or calculated decision. It was almost as if an invisible force pushed him toward that destiny. Mel Gibson, known for his intensity and perfectionism, was not looking for just an actor. He was looking for someone willing to suffer, someone who understood that playing Jesus would not be a performance, but an experience of total transformation. During the first conversation, Gibson looked directly into Caviezel's eyes and said something that would change everything. "You will never be the same again. Your career may end. You will be attacked, ridiculed, possibly destroyed. But if you accept this, you will experience something that transcends anything Hollywood can offer." Caviezel did not hesitate. He was 33 years old at the time, the same age Jesus was during the crucifixion. His initials were JC, the same as Jesus Christ. Coincidences that many would see only as curiosities, but which to Caviezel seemed like divine signs impossible to ignore. He knew that role was not just another job, it was a calling. Preparation for the role began months before filming. Caviezel immersed himself in the scriptures, reading the 4 Gospels repeatedly, studying every word spoken by Jesus, every gesture, every moment of silence. But the preparation was not only intellectual or spiritual, it was physical in a way few actors have ever experienced. He began to fast regularly, not as a diet, but as a spiritual discipline. He prayed for hours every day, often completely isolating himself from the outside world. People close to him began to notice subtle but disturbing changes. His voice became softer, but at the same time, more penetrating. His gaze changed, as if he were seeing beyond what was in front of him. And something in his presence began to unsettle even those who had known him for years. If you seek to understand the divine mysteries that happen around us, don't forget to like, subscribe and share in the comments your own spiritual experiences that may be connected to what you're about to discover. When it was time to begin filming in Matera, Italy, Caviezel was no longer the same man who had accepted the role months earlier. The crew noticed it immediately. It was not just a matter of being in character. It was as if Jim Caviezel, the Hollywood actor, had been replaced by someone older, more solemn, heavier. During breaks between scenes, while other actors relaxed or chatted, Caviezel remained silent, often on his knees, praying. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were few but loaded with a weight that made people around stop what they were doing to listen. Some crew members later confessed that they felt an almost supernatural strangeness when they were near him in those moments. It was not exactly fear, but a sensation of being in the presence of something much larger than any film production. Sometimes we wonder what exists beyond our physical world, and other times, strange things happen that make us question everything we thought about life. In such situations, better understanding can mean the difference between being confused and having clarity. That's exactly what our ebook, The Secret of Jesus' Apparitions, offers. Consider acquiring this incredible material for a symbolic price. This exclusive material offers keys to decipher divine signs and understand how Christ manifests in our days. Your contribution allows us to maintain this independent research work. The link to acquire the material is available in the pinned comment. What really began to frighten people was what happened during the filming of the most intense scenes. Caviezel was not just acting. He was living each moment of agony, each flagellation, each step toward Calvary, as if it were real. And in many ways it was. The flagellation scenes, which were supposed to be carefully choreographed to avoid real injuries, ended up being much more violent than planned. During one of the takes, one of the whips accidentally struck Caviezel's back with full force, opening a 14-inch wound. The scream that escaped from his mouth was not staged. It was a scream of real pain, and that scream remained in the final cut of the film. But what few know is that, even after the accident, Caviezel insisted on continuing filming. He did not want to pause, did not want immediate medical treatment. He said he needed to continue, that it was part of what he was there to do. As filming progressed, the line between Jim Caviezel and Jesus Christ began to disappear in ways no one expected. During the crucifixion scene, while he was nailed to the cross under intense cold and violent winds, something extraordinary happened. Lightning struck directly on Caviezel. The electrical discharge hit him with such force that he bit his own tongue and cheeks, and for a brief moment, everyone thought he had died. The cameras captured the exact moment, and whoever sees that scene can see the expression of terror on the faces of the crew around him. But Caviezel did not die. He survived, and when asked later about what he felt in that moment, he said something that left everyone in silence. I felt as if I were being tested, as if something was asking whether I was really willing to go all the way. But that was not the only incident. A few days later, during another scene on the cross, Caviezel suffered severe hypothermia. His body began to shake uncontrollably, his lips turned blue, and he lost consciousness for a few seconds. Once again, the medical team rushed to help him, but when he regained consciousness, his first words were, "Keep filming, don't stop." Caviezel's dedication reached a point that exceeded any professional logic. He had become something more than an actor playing a role. He had become a man willing to truly suffer to honor the story he was telling. And that frightened even Mel Gibson, who had seen many dedicated actors throughout his career, but never anything like what he was witnessing in Caviezel. During breaks between filming, something even more disturbing began to happen. Crew members reported that Caviezel seemed to enter states of deep trance. He would remain still for long periods, eyes fixed on some distant point, as if he were seeing something no one else could see. On one of those occasions, a makeup artist approached to touch up his face, and when she looked into his eyes, she swore she saw something different. It was not Jim looking back at her. It was someone else, someone much older, someone carrying an impossible weight to describe. She ran off the set and needed several minutes to compose herself. When other crew members asked what had happened, she could only say, "It wasn't him." For a moment, it wasn't him there. Similar reports began to spread among the crew. A production assistant named Marco Benedetti recounted that one night after a long day of filming, he found Caviezel alone at one of the locations, kneeling in prayer. Marco was going to discreetly step away when he heard Caviezel speaking. But it was not English. It was not Italian. It was something that sounded like Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke, the same language used in the film. Marco froze, watching from the shadows, while Caviezel continued speaking in that ancient language, as if he were conversing with someone invisible. When Marco mentioned this to other crew members, he discovered he was not the only one who had witnessed something like that. Several people reported hearing Caviezel speaking in languages he should not know, especially during moments when he was alone, thinking no one was watching. Caviezel's physical transformations were also impossible to ignore. He lost an alarming amount of weight during filming, not just because of the fasting and physical exhaustion, but because of something deeper. His face became thinner, more marked, and his eyes acquired a depth that was not there before. Scene photographers commented that, in certain lights, especially during sunset on the hills of Matera, Caviezel's face seemed to glow with its own luminosity. It was not the artificial glow of cinema lights. It was something organic, something that emanated from him. Several photos were taken of those moments, and when developed, some showed halos of light around his head that could not be explained technically. Mel Gibson ordered those photos to be kept secret, fearing they would be interpreted as cheap publicity stunts, but those who saw them knew there was no manipulation. Something was happening with Caviezel that defied any rational explanation. The wounds Caviezel suffered during filming also behaved in strange ways. The 14-inch wound on his back, which should take weeks to heal, began to show signs of accelerated healing. Doctors who examined the injury were confused. The rate of tissue regeneration was abnormally fast, far beyond what would be expected even under ideal treatment conditions. And it was not just that wound. Small cuts, bruises and scrapes that Caviezel accumulated during the flagellation and crucifixion scenes disappeared within days, sometimes overnight. A nurse from the medical team documented these cases in a personal diary, noting that he had never seen anything like it in his 25 years of career. He wrote, "It's as if his body is responding to something beyond medicine. Something is healing this man from the inside out." The transformations in Caviezel were not only physical or spiritual. His mind was also changing in ways he himself could not fully understand. He began to have extremely vivid dreams, not about his own life but about the life of Jesus. He dreamed of scenes that were not in the script, intimate moments from Christ's life that are not recorded in the Gospels. In one of those dreams, he saw Jesus as a child, playing with other children in Nazareth, laughing and running under the sun. In another, he saw Jesus as a young carpenter, working alongside Joseph, sweating under the heat of the day, muscles tense from effort. These dreams were so real, so detailed, that Caviezel began to question whether they were just dreams or memories of something he should not be able to remember. He shared some of those dreams with Mel Gibson, who was deeply disturbed. Gibson suggested that Caviezel speak with a priest, and so he did. The priest who listened to him, an elderly man with decades of experience in spiritual counseling, said something Caviezel never forgot. "You are not just playing Jesus. You are being invited to walk with him in a way that few are called to do. This is a blessing, but also a burden. And you need to be prepared to carry that burden for the rest of your life." Those words would prove prophetic in ways no one could have predicted. As filming came to an end, it became clear to everyone involved that something fundamental had changed in Jim Caviezel. He was no longer the confident rising actor who had arrived on set months before. He was a transformed man, marked by experiences that defied understanding. And the most disturbing thing of all was that these transformations did not disappear when the cameras stopped rolling. In fact, they were just beginning. When filming of The Passion of the Christ finally ended, the crew expected Jim Caviezel to gradually return to his normal life. Actors usually take some time to get out of intense characters, especially roles that demand so much physically and emotionally. But with Caviezel, something different was happening. He was not getting out of character. It was as if the character had permanently merged with who he was. Close friends who visited him after filming immediately noticed the change. His wife, Kerry Browett Caviezel, confided to close people that the man who came home was different from the man who had left for Italy. Not necessarily in a bad way, but definitely different. He spoke less, prayed more, and there were moments when she caught him staring at nothing with an expression of deep sadness she could not understand. The first months after filming were particularly difficult. Caviezel struggled with what psychologists would call dissociation, but those who knew him well knew it was something deeper than that. He had difficulty responding when people called him by name. Several times, at meetings or dinners, someone would say Jim and he would not react, as if that name no longer belonged to him. On one occasion, during an interview to promote the film, the interviewer had to repeat his name 3 times before Caviezel realized he was being called. When he finally responded, he said something strange. "I'm sorry. Sometimes I forget who I am now." The phrase was edited from the final interview, but those present in the studio never forgot it. But perhaps the most disturbing manifestation of Caviezel's transformation was what happened with his hands. Weeks after the end of filming, he began to develop wounds on the palms of his hands and wrists, exactly in the places where the nails would have pierced Christ's hands during the crucifixion. At first, they were just red spots, irritations that he and doctors attributed to some type of allergic reaction or dermatitis. But the spots did not improve. They worsened, transforming into open lesions that bled intermittently, especially on Fridays. Caviezel consulted several dermatologists and specialists, but none could diagnose the cause. Tests for infections, allergies, and autoimmune diseases came back negative. The wounds simply had no medical explanation. The transformations in Caviezel also deeply affected his family relationships, though in complex ways. He and his wife adopted 3 children after filming, all with significant special needs. When asked why they chose this particularly challenging path, Caviezel replied, "After playing a man who sacrificed himself completely for others, how could I live any other way? How could I seek comfort and ease when I know what true love demands?" The decision was not easy for the family, and there were moments of considerable tension. But Caviezel remained firm in his conviction that his life needed to reflect the values he had embodied during filming. During those difficult years, Caviezel rarely spoke publicly about the supernatural experiences he had during filming. But in private conversations with close friends, he admitted that he continued to have experiences he could not explain. He saw things sometimes, shapes in the corner of his vision that disappeared when he looked directly. He heard whispers in moments of silence, words that seemed to come from nowhere. And there were moments, especially during prayer, when he felt a physical presence near him, as if someone invisible was standing beside him. These experiences could easily be dismissed as hallucinations or stress, but Caviezel insisted they were real as anything else in his life, and those who knew him well had no reason to doubt his sincerity. As the years passed, Jim Caviezel's transformation continued to deepen in ways that surprised even those who knew him best. He was not simply recovering from the experience of playing Jesus, he was being permanently shaped by it. In 2011, almost a decade after filming, Caviezel began to speak more openly about what had happened to him, but always with deliberate caution. He carefully chose his words, aware that anything he said would be widely misinterpreted or ridiculed. During a lecture at a Catholic university, he made a statement that left the audience in profound silence. "I did not play Jesus. That would be impossible. What happened was that I allowed something to use me as an instrument. And once you open yourself that way, you cannot simply close again. You are marked forever." This permanent mark manifested in countless ways. Caviezel developed an extreme sensitivity to places and situations with spiritual significance. When he visited ancient churches, especially those with relics of saints or sites of martyrdom, he frequently felt waves of emotion that left him in tears. On a visit to the Colosseum in Rome, where thousands of Christians were martyred, He had to leave abruptly because the intensity of what he was feeling became unbearable. People who were with him described that he turned pale, began to tremble, and said repeatedly, "I can hear them. I can hear their prayers." When questioned later about the incident, Caviezel admitted that sometimes he felt that the barriers between the present and the past, between the physical and spiritual world, were thinner for him than for other people. But perhaps the most dramatic manifestation of Caviezel's ongoing transformation occurred in 2016 during a trip to Israel. He had avoided visiting the Holy Land in the years immediately after filming for reasons he himself could not fully articulate. But finally, he felt it was time. The trip was organized discreetly, without publicity, and he traveled with only a small group of close friends and spiritual advisors. What happened during that trip would change Caviezel in even deeper ways. When he visited the Garden of Gethsemane, the place where Jesus prayed before his arrest, something extraordinary occurred. Witnesses report that Caviezel knelt under one of the ancient olive trees and began to pray in silence. After several minutes, he began to cry, not soft tears, but deep, uncontrollable sobs that shook his entire body. These experiences in Israel marked a turning point for Caviezel. He returned to the United States with renewed clarity about his purpose. He began to accept invitations to speak at religious conferences, something he had avoided in previous years for fear of being seen only as a preacher. But now he felt he had something important to share, not about his acting career, but about the reality of spiritual transformation. His lectures were different from anything else on the Catholic conference circuit. He did not speak about success, motivation, or self-help. He spoke about suffering, about carrying crosses, about dying to oneself. And people responded extraordinarily. Audiences remained in absolute silence as he spoke, many in tears, feeling they were hearing not just an actor sharing experiences, but a man who had genuinely touched something transcendent. But not everything in Caviezel's post-passion life was about elevated mystical experiences. There was also a constant and painful struggle. He struggled with depression, especially during the years when his career was at its lowest points. There were moments when he questioned whether he had made a terrible mistake accepting the role, whether he had sacrificed everything for nothing. In an honest interview years later, he admitted, "There were dark nights of the soul where I screamed at God, asking why he had led me down this path only to abandon me. Why transform me this way if I was going to be rejected by everyone? It was my wife who kept me anchored during those times. She reminded me that suffering with purpose is the essence of the Christian message." One of the deepest aspects of Caviezel's transformation was how it affected his understanding of time and eternity. In recent interviews, he has spoken about how living with a constant awareness of eternity completely changed his priorities. He is no longer concerned with temporal success, recognition, or comfort. His only concern is fulfilling the purpose for which he was transformed. When they ask me if I regret accepting the role of Jesus, he said in a 2024 interview, "I respond that question no longer makes sense to me. Would you ask someone if they regret being born? Playing Jesus was not a role I accepted. It was a rebirth I went through, and you cannot undo a rebirth." This eternal perspective also deeply shaped his family life. His 3 adopted children, all with significant special needs, became the center of his life in a way few in Hollywood could understand. He speaks of them not as burdens or challenges, but as divine gifts that keep him anchored in the reality of sacrificial love. "Each of them teaches me something about Christ," he said. "They demand everything from me, all my patience, all my energy, all my love. And in that, they show me what Jesus did for us. He gave everything, without reservations, without conditions. And now I understand that, not just intellectually, but viscerally, because I live it every day." Recently, reports have emerged that Caviezel is again collaborating with Mel Gibson on a project related to the resurrection of Christ, potentially a sequel to The Passion of the Christ. Details remain scarce, but sources close to the project reveal that both men approach it with an almost sacred solemnity. They know they cannot simply make another movie. If they are going to revisit that territory, it needs to be again an experience of transformation, both for them and for the audience. And there is an awareness, especially for Caviezel, that going through this again may take his transformation to even deeper and potentially more difficult places. But he expresses willingness. If that's what God is asking, he recently said, then I'll go. It doesn't matter where it takes me. Jim Caviezel's transformation also manifested in his prayer life, which became the absolute center of his existence. He begins each day at 4 in the morning with an hour of contemplative prayer, followed by participation in Mass. He prays the Rosary daily, often multiple times. And he maintains regular periods of fasting, not just from food but from media, technology, and unnecessary social interaction. For Caviezel, these practices are not optional religious disciplines. They are the very breath of his spiritual life, the way he maintains connection with the source of his transformation. Without constant prayer, he admitted, I would be lost. The transformation I experienced is not something you achieve and then automatically maintain. It is something you need to nurture every day, every hour, through continuous union with Christ. But perhaps the deepest aspect of Caviezel's transformation is something few can fully articulate, and that includes Caviezel himself. It is the way he carries a presence that affects people around him. Those who meet him personally, even briefly, frequently report feeling something unusual. It is not charisma in the Hollywood sense. It is something quieter, deeper. A woman who met him at a charity event described it this way. When he shook my hand and looked into my eyes, it was as if he could see directly into my soul. Not in an invasive or uncomfortable way, but with a compassion that made me start crying for no apparent reason. It was as if, for a moment, I felt God's love through this man. The story of Jim Caviezel's transformation cannot be fully told without addressing what it means for all of us who witness it. Because what happened to him was not just an isolated personal experience. It was a sign, a visible demonstration of spiritual truths that most of us only know theoretically. When Paul wrote to the Galatians that it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me, he was describing precisely the kind of transformation that Caviezel experienced. The difference is that most Christians read those words as beautiful metaphor or distant ideal. But Caviezel lived them literally and viscerally, and the whole world could watch the process happen in real time. And that forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. If radical transformation is really what God calls us all to, why do so few of us experience it? Why do we continue so comfortably settled in our untransformed lives? The answer, as Caviezel discovered through his own suffering, is that true spiritual transformation requires a death. Not necessarily physical death, though sometimes even that, but the death of the ego, the death of our selfish ambitions, the death of our need for control and security. Jesus was clear about this when he said that whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Caviezel literally lost his life, the life he had planned, the career he was building, the comfortable identity he had created for himself. And in losing all that, he found something infinitely more valuable. A life lived in intimate union with Christ, an existence that has eternal meaning instead of just temporal success. But that death did not happen all at once. It was not a single clean event. It was and continues to be a painful and ongoing process. Every time Caviezel is rejected by Hollywood, every time he is ridiculed for his faith, every time he faces threats or opposition, he is invited again to die to himself, to let go of his need for human approval, to trust completely in God, even when God seems silent. And he does it, day after day, year after year. Not perfectly, he admits his failures and struggles, but consistently. And it is that consistency, that continuous fidelity through decades of trial, that gives his transformation an authenticity that cannot be faked or imitated. There is also a prophetic dimension to Caviezel's transformation that cannot be ignored. He has become, in a way, a sign for our times, a living reminder that God still acts in the world, still transforms lives, still calls people to extraordinary missions. In an age of skepticism, materialism, and widespread unbelief, the very existence of someone like Caviezel is a powerful refutation of the secular narrative that the supernatural is not real, that spiritual transformation is just magical thinking or self-deception. Because it is impossible to spend time with Caviezel, hear his story, witness how he lives, and conclude that nothing happened. Something clearly happened, something profound and lasting, something that cannot be adequately explained only in psychological or sociological terms. Caviezel's transformation also sheds light on the real cost of authentic Christian discipleship. Jesus never promised that following him would be easy or comfortable. On the contrary, he promised tribulation, persecution, and suffering. He said his followers would be hated for his sake, that they would have to carry crosses, that they would have to be willing to lose everything. But somewhere along the way, much of Western Christianity forgot these difficult truths and replaced them with a domesticated and comfortable version of faith that promises blessings, success, and happiness without demanding much in return. Caviezel, through his life and testimony, is calling the church back to the original and uncomfortable truths of the gospel. He is showing that the path to true life necessarily passes through death, that glory only comes through the cross, that real transformation is always painful before it is beautiful. There is a verse in Romans that has become deeply significant for Caviezel, and which he frequently quotes: "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." He lived that verse concretely. The sufferings he experienced, the physical pain during filming, Hollywood's rejection, the attacks on his reputation, the financial struggles, all of that has been real and significant. But he insists it does not compare with what he gained through his transformation. An intimate relationship with Christ, a life of eternal purpose, a peace that transcends circumstances, and the absolute certainty that his life has meaning that will last beyond his physical death. When we weigh these two sets of realities, he says, "There is no comparison. I would give everything again, suffer everything again, for the privilege of knowing Christ the way I know him now." This eternal perspective is perhaps the most precious fruit of Caviezel's transformation. He lives with a constant awareness that this life is only preparation for the next, that every choice we make here has eternal ramifications, that what really matters is not what we achieve temporally, but who we become spiritually. This awareness frees him from so many anxieties that torment most people. He does not worry about what critics say because he knows their opinions are vapor that disappears. He does not worry about financial security because he trusts that God will provide what is necessary. He does not fear death because he knows it is simply passage to true life, and that freedom, ironically, makes him more fully alive than most people who are desperately trying to preserve their earthly lives. But Caviezel is also careful not to romanticize his transformation or present it as something beyond the reach of ordinary people. He insists there is nothing special about him, that he is simply someone who said yes when God called, and then continued saying yes through all the consequences that came. And that yes, he emphasizes, is available to anyone. God is not looking for superhumans or exceptionally gifted people. He is looking for willing people, people who will trust him enough to take the leap in the dark, to let go of control, to allow him to do whatever he wants with their lives. And when he finds such people, He transforms them in ways that surpass everything they could imagine or achieve on their own. Caviezel's journey also teaches us about the nature of true holiness. Holiness is not moral perfection or absence of flaws. Caviezel is the first to admit he still struggles, still sins, still fails. Holiness is, instead, consistent orientation toward God, constant desire to be more completely transformed into the image of Christ, willingness to rise after each fall and continue walking. It is perseverance through decades of silent and hidden faithfulness, not just dramatic moments of heroism. And it is that consistent perseverance that Caviezel has demonstrated year after year, away from the spotlight, in his prayer life, in his marriage, in his parenting, in his daily choices. That is real holiness. The holiness possible for all of us if we are willing to cooperate with God's grace. As we look at Jim Caviezel's transformation in all its complexity, we are forced to confront questions about our own lives. Are we living in a transformed way or just a reformed way? Are we allowing Christ to live through us or just trying to live for Christ through our own efforts? Are we willing to pay the real price of discipleship, or are we looking for a bargain version of Christianity that does not cost much? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are essential. Because Caviezel's life shows us that real transformation is possible, that God is still in the business of radically changing lives, but also that such transformation demands everything from us. There are no shortcuts. There is no easy version. There is only the way of the cross, the way of death to self, the way that Jesus walked, and that all his true followers must walk as well. If these revelations about the radical transformation God desires to work in our lives awakened something deep in your spirit, demonstrate it by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing in the comments how God has manifested in your own life or how you feel he is calling you to a deeper transformation. Your testimony can touch the heart of someone who needs this message and is struggling alone, thinking that these experiences of radical transformation are impossible or reserved only for special people. Join our community of truth seekers who understand that real Christianity goes far beyond comfortable religion, and continue with us on this journey of spiritual discoveries that can change your life forever, just as they changed Jim Caviezel's life in ways he could never have imagined when he said that first yes to Mel Gibson over 20 years ago.